This is Ursula K. Le Guin, who, in 2014, when accepting the National Book Foundation's Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters, slammed the publishing industry for its pursuit of profit over art.
I think hard times are coming when we will be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now and can see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being, and even imagine some real grounds for hope. We will need writers who can remember freedom, poets, visionaries, the realists of a larger reality. Right now, I think we need writers who know the difference between production of a market commodity and the practice of an art. Developing written material to suit sales strategies in order to maximize corporate profit and advertising revenue is not quite the same thing as responsible book publishing or authorship.
An enduring aspect of Le Guin's career was an utter rejection of the commodification of art. We see this also in the afterword to A Wizard of Earthsea. Le Guin writes, quote, "Fantasy as an assembly line commodity leaves me cold, but I rejoice when I see it written as it always was, literature, and recognized as such."
The editors began to understand you.
Yeah, because I've always written kind of dingy stuff, stuff that was hard to categorize. A lot of what I write that is published as science fiction is probably not properly science fiction even, but it doesn't matter. Science fiction is a very open, generous field where you can do all sorts of stuff.
Well, I noticed it seemed to me that in your articles about science fiction, somewhat of a frustration with being in a category. Do you feel some kind of?
Well, it cuts both ways. If you're put into one of these pigeonholes, a genre like romances or science fiction or westerns or mysteries, a lot of readers and a lot of the serious critics and reviewers will automatically not even read your books. So you're cut out from a certain amount of dialogue and a certain amount of readership because people automatically assume that if it's science fiction, it's got to be lousy, you see, that sort of thing, which is very unfortunate and rather stupid. It's changing because now science fiction is being taught as simply a branch of literature, which it is, in a lot of schools and colleges. So all that is changing, and that's the bad side of the coin. The good side is that if you're a science fiction writer, you have a large and intelligent readership ready-made.
Yeah, well, you have fans, so you have a fan club after you.
And they write you letters.
Upon release, the book met with an enthusiastic reception, and what Le Guin had written as a standalone novel soon became a career-spanning series. The way Le Guin sums up Ged's journey is by saying that right from the beginning, she knew where Ged would have to go. Quote, "Not only to learn to be a wizard, but to learn to be Ged." As Le Guin said many times throughout her career, she's never been even remotely interested in stories of war and battle. She laments something like Star Wars, to go all the way to space and still be stuck with war, even in fiction, which can do so much more. Just like Le Guin's science fiction, which often seeks non-violent anarchist alternatives to human society, Earthsea is a world largely without war. In Le Guin's own words, quote, "My mind doesn't work in terms of my imagination refuses to limit all the elements that make an adventure story and make it exciting, danger, risk, challenge, courage, to battlefields. A hero whose heroism consists of killing people is uninteresting to me, and I detest the hormonal war orgies of our visual media." What a phrase. She goes on, "War as a moral metaphor is limited, limiting, and dangerous." To come now to the novel itself, it has to be said that A Wizard of Earthsea is gorgeously written. Even though it's a novel primarily of internal conflicts, we still get a strong sense of the politics of diverse nations and institutions, which Le Guin will go on to develop in the second novel of the series, The Tombs of Artuan. Even in the first chapter, there is a battle scene of sorts, as Kargish invaders assault Roke Island. It's exhilarating to see young Ged, before he has even learned his true name, employing magic, calling fog and mist to disorient the Kargish warriors. The prose is brilliant. Le Guin has that rare gift of knowing precisely when to play a sentence out, elegantly, letting it unspool as if weightless, and exactly when to hit the reader with a bolt of a short sentence, as she does in this battle scene, which is resolved non-violently. Quote, "It rankled at his heart that he should die, spitted on a Kargish lance, while still a boy, that he should go into the dark land without ever having known his own name, his true name as a man. He looked down at his thin arms, wet with cold fog dew, and raged at his weakness, for he knew his strength. There was power in him, if he knew how to use it. But need alone is not enough to set power free. There must be knowledge." It's beautiful. There's a rhythm here that sets Le Guin apart from other writers. If we take literary just to mean exhibiting a mastery of craft, then Le Guin is up there with the best of literary sci-fi and fantasy writers, and of writers in general. The way Le Guin builds a sense of her magic system is also a masterclass. In Earthsea, words spoken in the old tongue, the tongue of dragons, are magic. One peculiar side effect is that while dragons can lie and misdirect in their native tongue, humans are bound to the truth of the words they speak. Naming is magic, and to know the name of another person, another animal, another being, is to have power over them. To know our own true name is to have power over ourselves. But there are inbuilt limits to this, and a degree of mystery to what is one of the most nuanced of magic systems, and the most compelling. We learn early that to cast a spell, for instance, that creates a storm at sea, a wizard would have to know the name of every individual drop in the ocean. Quote, "Thus, that which gives us the power to work magic sets the limits of that power." This is all, of course, a metaphor for writing, storytelling, and the power of words that Le Guin has such a respect for. Language, too, for all its magic, has its limitations. Later in the novel, the younger sister of Ged's old wizard school buddy asks him a very simple question. Quote, "Why do wizards not summon useful things into being, such as food?" Ged replies, "Well, we could do so, but we don't much wish to eat our words, as they say. Meat pie is only a word, after all. We can make it odorous and savorous, and even filling, but it remains a word. It fools the stomach, and gives no strength to the hungry man." It's worth reflecting on, isn't it? No matter how soul-nourishing books can be for us, or how much they minister a salve on our loneliness, words can only ever be words. Despite their magic, with the ability to speak across centuries, connecting us across distant lands, they are also at the same time just ink marks, inert on a page or a screen, only meaning something because we collectively decide it should mean something. Finally, we come to the book's main conflict, when a young Ged, meeting the bravado-provoked dare of another student at the wizard school, attempts to summon the spirit of a long-deceased woman from an age of myth. What Ged summons instead is a shadow, a hideous creature that absorbs light, and maims Ged across the face before fleeing. Ged spends the rest of the novel at first fleeing, then pursuing the shadow, leading to numerous confrontations, right up to the novel's finale. And here, to understand this better, we need to take a brief detour through Le Guin's lifelong preoccupation with Daoism. If you have even a passing familiarity with Chinese media, you can almost always pick the Daoists. They're the blokes with the funny hats, often portrayed as mystical, esoteric, even cult-like. The pop culture representation of Daoists, even within China, is more than a little reductive.
赵师兄，我今天就把杨过托付给你了。今后，请你对他一定要严加教诲，不必有任何顾忌。郭靖在此先谢过了。
请郭大侠放心，我一定尽心尽力管教好这个孩子。
杨过，从今天开始，你就是我全真门人。我全真教虽然创教不过几代，但是江湖中人提起我全真教，都会叹服一声好。你知道这是为什么吗？ 不是因为我全真教武功高强，而是因为全真教行侠仗义，不做奸邪之事。你今日成了我全真门下，既要跟着师傅好好练习武功，还要和同门师长好好学着怎么做人。你要是不循规蹈矩，严于律己，我第一个就不能饶你。
I'm far from an expert in Daoism, or even a Daoist myself, but like Le Guin, find myself drawn to aspects of it. Its counterintuitive way of looking at the world and the lives we lead. There wouldn't be much sense in me breaking down Daoism as a philosophy, because in many ways it's a system of thought that defies explanation and analysis. The more you try to pin it down, the further you move from the Tao. Le Guin herself embarked on a lifelong project to translate the Tao Te Ching with help from a translator. This wouldn't be any by-the-numbers translation though. Le Guin never learnt a Chinese language, let alone the writing system. Le Guin's ambition was to construct a poetic translation, using the corresponding characters as a sort of code, and aligning that with the English translations that had come before, using them as a kind of Rosetta Stone. And this is exactly what she did. Published finally in 1997. Her stated aim, listed in the translation, quote, "Most translations have caught meanings in their net, but prosily, letting the beauty slip through. And in poetry, beauty is no ornament. It is the meaning. It is the truth." Reading various sections of Le Guin's Tao Te Ching, we see her preoccupation with naming and language, making it easy to understand why this ancient text spoke so strongly to her personal beliefs, particularly about writing and literature. The way you can go isn't the real way. The name you can say isn't the real name. Heaven and earth begin in the unnamed. Name's the mother of the 10,000 things. 32. The way goes on forever, nameless. Uncut wood, nothing important, yet nobody under heaven dare try to carve it. To order, to govern, is to begin naming. When names proliferate, it's time to stop. If you know when to stop, you're in no danger. Uncut wood connects this to the first chapter. Le Guin says, quote, "You have to make order, you have to make distinctions, but you also have to know when to stop before you've lost the whole in the multiplicity of parts. The simplicity or singleness of the way is that of water which always rejoins itself." It's difficult to imagine a more Daoist ending than what occurs in the finale of Wizard of Earthsea. The story ends with Ged calling the shadow's true name, the name that he shares with it. Ged, quote, "Ged had neither lost nor won, but, naming the shadow of his death with his own name, had made himself whole, who, knowing his whole true self, cannot be used or possessed by any power other than himself, and whose life therefore is lived for life's sake, and never in the service of ruin, or pain, or hatred, or the dark." The shadow becomes a part of him, as it always was, and we come back full circle to the novel's initial epigraph and poem. Only in silence the word, only in dark the light, only in dying life, bright the hawk's flight on the empty sky. Representations of the shadow self are rife in the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, going all the way back to folklore and mythology. To digress, I never once thought I'd be quoting Carl Jung in my first ever video, but here we are. Disclaimer, I'm much more of a Freudian than a Jungian, but Jung does have some worthwhile concepts for our purposes, particularly when he's not banging on about alchemy and religion. Jung's concept of a shadow self is an interesting one, regardless. Quote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This act is the essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge." Quote, "To confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light. Once one has experienced a few times what it is like to stand judgingly between the opposites, one begins to understand what is meant by the self. Anyone who perceives his shadow and his light simultaneously sees himself from the two sides and thus gets in the middle." We see this time and time again in stories from traditional folktales to contemporary pop culture. We see it in video games like Zelda: The Ocarina of Time, where Link must confront Dark Link in a memorable duel. We see it in classic literature, Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. an 1886 novel that preempts Sigmund Freud, a writer who serves the story above all else. It's the sort of book to which everyone will bring their own life experience and thoughts to. It's political without being even remotely polemical. As I myself am on a journey to discover my own true name, as we all are, I thought it would make for an ideal book to discuss for a first video. I hope you got something out of this video, if only the curiosity to pick up one of Le Guin's great stories. All the best, and until next time.